At my last parish in O'Fallon, Missouri, we had a signboard right there on Main Street. My brother Dennis, who thinks he's funny, as do I and each of my siblings, would from time to time send me suggestions to put on that signboard that made me laugh. Many would not be particularly appropriate to say out loud here. But here's one. The hokey pokey. What if that really is what it's all about? The hokey pokey. Many of you know, right, that melody, the lyrics, the actions. You put your right hand in, you put your right hand out. Well, you know the rest. It's rather silly fun. Now, there are a number of different thoughts about the origin of the hokey pokey. Some say it was written to satirize the Catholic Mass. When the Mass was in Latin and the priest with his back to the people spoke the phrase, "This is my body," that phrase in Latin kind of sounded like hocus pocus, which became the hokey pokey. Now, fortunately, when we gather for Mass, it is not hocus pocus. It truly is Jesus surrendering himself, body and blood, out of love, and the invitation that we do so ourselves. That's why I actually think there is some wisdom for us in the last verse of that song. The last verse, you may recall, goes something like this. You put your whole self in, you put your whole self out. You put your whole self in and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. You put your whole self in. That really is what it's all about. It's all about being willing to jump in, to put our whole selves into something, knowing that there's usually a price to pay for doing what is good and loving and right for this world. And when we jump in, well, sometimes we really do indeed get all turned around. This is clear from today's scriptures. In the first reading, the prophet Elijah asks this woman for some food. Now, they're in the middle of a great famine, and this poor widow honestly says that she has none, that they're just about to starve to death, just a little bit. Elijah asks her to share that little bit anyway. She senses that Elijah is a holy man, and she decides to give her meager resources in spite of what it will cost her. She puts her whole self in. When she does so, somehow she and her son still have enough food. But she risks her whole self, her life, and her son's life in order to be generous. Something similar happens in the gospel. Here, Jesus watches a poor woman put all she has into the collection basket. Now, it seems to me that the reaction of Jesus does two things. First, he is critiquing the religious system, again, that oppresses and takes advantage of the poor, that demands that she gives all that she has just to pay the temple tax. At the same time, I also think there's a bit of admiration in Jesus for this elderly woman's faith as she gives all she has, trusting God to take care of her. Now, I am not advocating in any way that we give the church our whole livelihood. And we are wise to have some caution about those who would manipulate us for their own gain. But where are we willing to put our whole selves in? We cannot simply sit on the sidelines of the dance floor and never truly join the dance ourselves. Where are we willing to put our time and energy on the line, knowing that, well, there's likely a price to pay for doing so? Sometimes it's fairly dramatic. I've always had some admiration for people who pick up everything and go help in a time of a natural disaster. I mean, there are people who uproot their whole lives to help victims of wildfires or floods, or who go to places like Haiti to do what they can. I see it in the Vincent de Paul Society members who go into people's homes to assess needs. It's not a clear-cut process. And as is true in so many other ministries, it's often difficult, unglamorous work, and it does cost them. Or I see it in the spouse or child of someone with Alzheimer's who feeds them and who wipes their chin countless times, who quietly treats them with the dignity they deserve. It's that third grader who sits with that other kid who gets left out, that nurse or hospice worker who is there for that dying person and holds their hand and weeps a quiet tear when there is no family to be there. I see it in countless ways in people who put their whole selves in to do what is needed for love. How about you? Are you putting your whole self into anything these days? And if you are, is it a noble pursuit or is it a trivial pursuit? Where might God be asking you or me to commit more of ourselves, to be willing to do what is needed for love, to put our whole selves in? These two women in today's readings, they don't hold anything back. They jump in. That's what it's all about. It is what it's all about. A final aside. It is said that when Larry Laprise, the man who wrote the Hokey Pokey, died, he left very specific instructions for his burial and funeral, which the mortician tried to follow faithfully. And everything was going well until it came time for the mortician to put the deceased man's body back into the casket. Here are the instructions started with: you put the right leg in. Well, and things got a little difficult from there. Anyway, try not to think about that if you're at a wedding reception or some event where they hear that song again. And if you or I ever do hear that song again, or the melody pops back into our brains, maybe we could let ourselves be reminded of the wisdom of that last verse. You and I are indeed called after the example of Christ himself and at his command to put our whole selves in. And if we're not doing that, it's time to turn ourselves around